And what does that mean for how we relate to the Jewish tradition and how we relate to the Christian tradition? Because God was also preserving something essential through the church. And then that leads us again to the point that AJ underlined, which was the sense of two covenant partners that are in need of one another. And part of our role as Messianic Jews is incensed to be heirs of both of these traditions and to help each of them find one another.
Thank you. Is this a question?
Yes.
Okay, so this will be a last question, okay. Then we'll take about 15, 20 minutes for some discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Levine, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the motif of blindness in Luke and Acts, particularly in how it relates to Luke's portrayal of Jewish followers of Jesus, because as you noted on the Emmaus Road, essentially his own disciples are blind, and you get this throughout the Gospels and or throughout Luke and Acts, and Paul himself encounters and has his own blindness overcome, and it's just particularly interesting to me that the Gospel or that Acts ends with this kind of comment about blindness, and Jesus' inaugural sermon involves the overcoming of blindness. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's coming up now, especially considering disability studies in the Gospels and how you talk about differently abled individuals. There is, as far as I can tell, because I've actually spent some time looking at this, our metaphors betray us. There's no single way that this is used. So sometimes it's utilitarian in Luke 4 to give sight to the blind, and then Jesus gives sight to the blind. So that's kind of a playing out of the Messianic mission. The two on the road to Emmaus are unable to see until you get this. So it's divine blindness and then divine sight. And even Bible study doesn't get you there. So what is it that's going to get you through? Paul becomes blind on the road to on the Damascus. It's like, stay off the road. So Paul becomes blind on the road to Damascus. But then again, it was his name Elymas, where Paul actually blinds somebody. You know, boy, don't cross an apostle. So it can function as metaphor. It can function as punishment. It can function as an idea of enlightenment. Sometimes it's temporary. And I wonder if with others it becomes permanent. So that seeing they won't see, and hearing they won't hear, and that's the end of it. And that's the Lucan repurposing of the quote that you get connected to the parables in Matthew and Mark. And Luke simply, shoves it up toward the end. And I don't know whether Luke sees that as a permanent thing until some sort of eschatological eye surgery. So it doesn't work out evenly each time you see it, because each time you see it, it's having a different narrative function.
Right.
That was, oh, by the way, that was also the case in antiquity, because sometimes, like in the case of Tiresias, the blind prophet, sometimes blindness is what in fact gives you insight. Because you look internally as well as externally. And if you look at in relation to earlier examples of blindness, sometimes blindness is just blindness. Isaac is blind. It's not a punishment. It's a potential disability because he gets the kids confused, maybe. But it's also, it's what happens when you get old. So even when you look at individual examples of blindness, you have to figure out exactly how they're functioning. Thank you.
All right, so let's have some time for table discussion like we did last night. You remember that? All right, just making sure everybody's still connecting here. But what I'm going to do is ask AJ and Mark to provide a prompt for the table discussion.